Good evening to you, dear companion of quiet hours. Might I, with all the civility due from one of my station, request a small favor? If the tale that follows stirs your curiosity or grants you a moment's repose, do consider offering a modest, sharing this recital with others of refined taste, and subscribing to this humble channel of mine. It keeps the hearth warm and the lamp trimmed, as they say. Permit me a small curiosity. From which corner of the world do you listen? And what hour, bright or dim, finds you here with me? Whether it is the soft blush of morning or the velvet hush of midnight, I hope this story greets you gently and keeps good company in your solitude. I shall read this account slowly, with the care of one who remembers the weight of a well-turned phrase and the virtue of stillness. Do settle in perhaps with a cup of tea, or if the hour permits, a measured pour of brandy. Shall we then set the tale in motion? It begins as so many quiet tragedies do, in a house too dignified to admit sorrow aloud. Winslow Hall limestone, ivy-veiled, settled on Langdon Street, with its back to Lake Mendota, woke that spring morning not to birdsong or wind, but to the muted industry of silver trays and fresh linens. Servants moved like hushed shadows through long hallways, bearing chrysanthemums, polished candlesticks, and invitations pressed in gold. The air held the faint scent of starch and rosewater, and somewhere beyond the French doors the lake murmured beneath its thawing skin. It was, after all, a morning of celebration. Miss Catherine Winslow rose not from dreams, but from habit. She was the younger daughter of the house, and like many such creatures of quiet rank, she understood that her portion of the world was to observe, to attend, and to never be the occasion. As the clock in the upstairs corridor chimed 7, she moved from her narrow bed to the lace-curtained window. Below, gardeners were smoothing the gravel walk and unpacking crates of white lily. In the breakfast room, Marguerite Winslow, her stepmother, was already directing the affair, with the icy precision of a woman who had memorized the social hierarchy of Madison as others might recite scripture. "No daisies," she was saying, "too pastoral. And fetch Thaddeus. The speech must be practiced aloud. He has a tendency to muddle his tenses when nervous." Catherine took her seat, folding her napkin in deliberate silence. Evelyn, radiant even in dressing robe and curl pins, arrived with a flourish and a yawn. "Isn't it thrilling, Kathy? An engagement?" "My engagement?" "Quite," said Catherine, who had not been consulted in the matter, but had seen enough to predict it. Evelyn was nothing if not theatrical, and Mr. Langford's arrival, though recent, had caused tremors across every tea-table, from State Street to Spate. Marguerite produced a velvet box from her handbag and placed it beside Evelyn's plate. "A gift from your father and me. A small tribute to your future." Inside lay the Winslow sapphires, an heirloom necklace once worn at state dinners in Washington and waltzes in Vienna. Evelyn gasped, "Oh, Mamma, it's perfection." "And there is something for Catherine as well," Marguerite added, signaling to a maid. A smaller parcel was placed before her. No velvet, no crest, just brown paper and a neat bow. Inside, a tarnished brass frame held an old certificate, common stock in the Central Wisconsin Railway Company, dated 1879. Catherine blinked. The company had folded in 1906. Thaddeus cleared his throat. "A piece of family history. It once belonged to your great-uncle Cyrus. He was an investor, briefly." There was no laughter, only the careful sounds of tea being poured, forks against china, and Evelyn's breathless delight over her necklace. The distinction between heirloom and artifact was, of course, deliberate. In old families, even cruelty is ceremonial. No one mentioned it directly, but the room had absorbed the choice. Evelyn had received a future, Catherine a relic. After breakfast, Catherine found herself wandering the West Wing gallery, the certificate under her arm like a disobedient book. The portraits on the walls, stern uncles, waistcoated statesmen, ladies with pearl-drop ears, offered no solace. She paused before a painting of her mother, who had died when Catherine was only 7. The resemblance was slight. Her mother's beauty had been delicate and deliberate, not the quiet cleverness that had settled into Catherine's features. But there was a softness in the eyes that no brush could entirely conceal. In the conservatory, Evelyn's laughter echoed like music too loud for the room. Catherine turned toward the library. He came precisely at 10:30, in a dark suit that bore the quiet costliness of Boston tailoring. Nathaniel Prescott Langford III was tall, but not imposing. His presence was the sort that required no announcement, only attention. Thaddeus greeted him with an enthusiastic handshake. Marguerite kissed the air near his cheek. Evelyn glided forward like a scene partner taking her mark. "Mr. Langford, how radiant Madison becomes when you grace it," she said. "And how fortunate I am," he replied, "to find it already so well lit." Catherine observed this from the archway, half shielded by a cascade of ivy and the smell of citrus blossoms. Langford's voice had a timbre that suggested he read aloud often to others and to himself. Their eyes met. Briefly, he nodded. She returned it, and then he was drawn into the sitting-room by Evelyn's hand on his sleeve and the rustle of the day's script. It was nearly dusk when she found herself in the conservatory, notebook in hand, seeking a patch of light. She'd forgotten Langford had been sent out for a walking tour of the garden. He was already there, standing near the camellias, examining a volume of Browning someone had left on the marble bench. "I'm told this is the least drafty corner," he said, without looking up. "It's also where the begonias thrive." He turned, smiled faintly. "Do you favor poetry?" "I favor silence," she replied, "but poetry comes close." They spoke then quietly, cautiously, of schoolrooms and train stations, of fathers who loved ideas more than people, of what it meant to be second in importance, but first in awareness. "I was raised," Langford said, "to understand that legacy is what you leave behind, not what you carry." "I've always wondered if the reverse might be more honest." Catherine nodded. "Some burdens are too light. They float until they vanish." When Evelyn entered 10 minutes later, laughing over some misplaced candelabra, the two parted with nods more intimate than touch. That night, while the house glittered with toasts and ribbons, Catherine sat alone in her childhood room. The windows faced the lake, which shimmered dully under the moon. From the hall came Evelyn's laughter, bright and endless. She held the stock certificate up to the lamplight. Its embossed seal was cracked. The ink had faded. It was worth nothing. But as she looked into the frame, she saw her own reflection blurry, half lit beside her sister's echoing joy. A portrait of presence and absence, both in the same pane. And beneath it, in old ink, Central Wisconsin Railway Company, owned in full. It was not the inheritance she'd been promised, but it was the one she'd been given. It is said among our kind that charm is inherited, like silver flatware or scandal. But there are rare men whose appeal lies not in lineage or affectation, but in the quiet practice of attention. Nathaniel Prescott Langford III was one such man. Catherine Winslow had long cherished solitude, especially when curated to appear accidental. That particular afternoon, she donned her long wool coat and gloves and set off toward the University of Wisconsin campus, with a book beneath her arm and no declared purpose. The sun filtered coldly through bare-limbed sugar maples. Their shadows spidered across the cobblestones. She settled on a bench near Bascom Hill, ostensibly reading, but more often glancing up at the passers-by. Her thoughts wandered, as they often did lately, to the peculiar stillness she carried since Evelyn's engagement announcement. She was halfway through a stanza of Rossetti when a voice interrupted the cadence. "You've a fine eye for benches, Miss Winslow. This one commands the hill as if it were royalty." She looked up. Mr. Langford stood a few feet away, gloved hands behind his back, hat tipped with casual formality. "And you, sir, have a talent for surprising readers." He smiled, his expression not triumphant but amused. "May I?" He gestured to space beside her. She nodded. They spoke not with the awkwardness of fresh acquaintances, but as if they were continuing a conversation begun months ago. He recalled a line of Swinburne she had quoted in the conservatory. She confessed a preference for quieter poets, Keats, sometimes Dickinson. "Do you write yourself?" he asked. "Only grocery lists, and those sparingly." They laughed gently together. He told her of Boston winters, of the Atlantic's gray moods, and the fatigue of family expectations. "And you?" he asked. She looked out at the campus lawn. "I grew up in a house where ambition was stitched into our pillowcases. I find myself allergic to embroidery." At last she stood, brushing the wool skirt smooth. "Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Langford, and thank you for lending the bench such distinction," he replied. She walked away first, again. 2 days later, the Winslow dining room gleamed under chandeliers polished to a militant shine. Evelyn's luncheon was less a social event and more a stage production, and she its self-appointed ingenue. Catherine arrived late, unnoticed, and was seated 3 places from the end. Evelyn, radiant in blue silk, held court with the bright, brittle energy of someone attempting to charm and dominate simultaneously. She praised Langford's recent investment in telegraph companies with almost maternal pride. Langford smiled politely, sipped slowly, and answered with the detached courtesy of a man schooled in feminine performance. Whenever Catherine offered a murmur of agreement or passed a dish, he met her eyes briefly. Not often, just enough. On a snowy Thursday, Catherine sat alone in the periodicals room of the university library, meticulously proofreading galley pages for a small press that published state histories. Her work was anonymous, clerical, and hers. A tall figure entered the reading room, brushing snow from his coat. She barely looked up. He passed, then paused. "Miss Winslow?" She turned. "I did not expect you here," he said, genuinely surprised. "I could say the same. Most society gentlemen avoid periodicals unless their name appears in them. I'm researching the Milwaukee Ordinance revisions." She lifted a brow. "For leisure?" "For debt," he replied, grinning. "I promised a friend I'd contribute to his treatise on municipal law." He noticed the galley sheets and her red pen. "You work?" "A lady must occupy herself with something." He sat across from her. For 20 minutes they whispered between rows of shelves, speaking of transportation policy and poetry with equal weight. When he stood to leave, he said, "Miss Winslow, you make Madison considerably more interesting." That Saturday, snow had begun to crust the window panes of Catherine's modest apartment near campus when Evelyn arrived unannounced, sweeping into the room with a fur collar and the scent of lilacs. "Darling," she trilled, "I simply had to see your new little quarters." Catherine offered tea. Evelyn declined. They sat opposite each other, the hearth unlit, the silence stretched. "I hear Mr. Langford has taken quite a liking to the university," Evelyn said lightly. Catherine lifted a brow. "He's been seen often near here. So have you. You wouldn't want people thinking you're, what shall I say, interfering, would you?" Catherine folded her hands in her lap. "That depends entirely on what you imagine I might be interfering with." Evelyn's smile did not reach her eyes. "Just be cautious. Our family has never handled rumors well." When she left, the air felt cleaner. That night, Catherine sat beside her window as snow whispered down onto slate rooftops. Her fingers traced the edge of a well-worn volume of Keats. She told herself not to hope, not to believe in glances or remembered poetry lines. But inside the book, a single pressed flower, transferred from the pages of Rossetti days earlier, rested like a quiet confession. She left it there, not as promise, only as proof that she had noticed. There is a particular kind of silence that inhabits rooms built for one, a silence not of vacancy, but of discretion. Catherine Winslow's modest flat on Dayton Street was a study in such restraint. It consisted of 2 rooms, a stove of middling temperament, and windows that refused to shut entirely in winter. Her curtains were lace, but yellowing. The bed was narrow, but always neat. A vase, perpetually holding 1 or 2 market flowers, sat beside the reading chair. Every object was purposeful, earned by her own hand, or kept for sentiment. She did not decorate with heirlooms, only memory. On her kitchen table, amidst the mail, lay an envelope from her father. The handwriting was unmistakable, stiff, precise, impatient. She read it standing up. "Catherine, I trust you are in good health. It is unnecessary to remain in town now that Evelyn is engaged. I suggest you consider returning to Langdon Street. T.W. No affection, no curiosity, just logistics." She set the letter aside and opened the stove, feeding it with the note and a sliver of yesterday's paper. The flat remained cold, but she preferred it that way. In a narrow office above a printer's shop near the Capitol, Catherine became Miss Ellery. It was an affectation born of necessity and irony. Ellery had been her grandmother's maiden name, once spoken in drawing rooms. Now it was penciled onto editorial proofs. She proofed monographs and business leaflets, typed articles for temperance societies and agricultural boards. The foreman, Mr. Phelps, respected her for her silence more than her syntax. One afternoon, a woman browsing the press's educational circulars peered closely at Catherine. "Haven't we met? You look so familiar. Were you at the Parker debutante ball?" Catherine smiled faintly. "I believe you're mistaking me for someone more fortunate." The woman apologized, laughed nervously, and left. Catherine resumed proofreading. Evelyn's note arrived first. "My dearest Cat, we must get together. I'm certain you're terribly busy playing Joan of Arc in some ink-stained tower, but do take a breath. Nathaniel asked after you. Lunch soon? Will restore your spirits, E. Then Marguerite and Looping Hand. There's still time to marry well, darling. These experiments in labor are fine for actresses and suffragists, but remember your lineage. All love. Mama both were torn into strips and used to kindle the evening stove." 2 days later, as she bent over a press plate, correcting a comma in a county address directory, Catherine glanced out the window. There he was, Langford, standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost with a copy of the Saturday Evening Post tucked under one arm. He did not approach. He did not wave. But when she looked directly at him, he nodded once and tipped his hat. She turned back to her work. Her fingers trembled only slightly. It came wrapped in a brown envelope, thicker than bills, sealed with red wax. She broke it open and found 3 documents: a cover letter from a Milwaukee legal firm, a valuation summary, and the original stock certificate. Her pulse quickened as she read. "We write to inform you that the enclosed security, previously assumed inactive, pertains to holdings in the Midwestern Freight Rail Consortium, recently absorbed by the Union Midland Company. Due to recent litigation and settlement, holders of specific historical certificates are entitled to retroactive compensation and equity conversion. Based on your share class and holdings, the valuation is listed below." She blinked. Read again. Looked to the figure. She stood slowly, the room tilting gently. The certificate, once a symbolic trinket, was now worth more than her family's entire Langdon estate. She whispered, "That can't be right." But the paper did not change. The train from Madison to Milwaukee hummed and clattered with a rhythm that matched Catherine's quiet resolve. She had told her landlady she was visiting an elderly aunt for the weekend, a fiction tidy enough not to invite further questions. She wore gloves 1 size too large and a plain traveling cloak, every inch the image of anonymous modesty. Miss Lillian Ashe's law office was tucked between a Lutheran rectory and a shop that sold fine umbrellas. It was a narrow space, all angles and ledgers, smelling faintly of lemon oil and ink. Books towered like monoliths against every wall, and the windows let in light reluctantly, as if it, too, had been cross-examined. Lillian Ashe herself was small, sharp-nosed, and brisk. Her eyes flicked up over wire-rimmed spectacles when Catherine entered. "You're the Winslow girl." Catherine didn't blink. "I'm Catherine Ellery." "Good answer." Ashe gestured to a chair. "Sit. I dislike clients who faint." "I don't faint," Catherine replied. "I adjust." The meeting lasted over 2 hours. Miss Ashe poured strong black coffee into cracked porcelain mugs and proceeded to dismantle Catherine's understanding of her own life. Evaluation, once believed to be symbolic or defunct, was not merely valuable. It was extraordinary. The market price for Union Midland common stock has surged. With your certificate's class and age plus settlement interest, you're owed just under $105,000. Catherine said nothing. Miss Ashe waited, then arched an eyebrow. "No swoon? No weeping?" "Not today." "Lord help me," Ashe muttered. "You're worse than the old men. At least they gloat." Catherine asked about stability, taxation, and precedent. She requested the documents be stored under a legal alias and her name omitted from all filings. "You're clever," Ashe said. "Dangerously so. Most women come in here clutching pearls. You're plotting a campaign." "I'm simply tired of being Miss Reed." Together they drafted a trust. The name Ellery Holdings was born. Investments were discussed. Local publishing, small parcels of farmland, and a boarding school in need of endowment. "And the Winslows?" Ashe asked. "What tale shall we spin for them? They'll hear what they expect, that I'm clerking, keeping busy, behaving. They never look beyond the surface." Ashe chuckled. Your family will smell money like hunting dogs. They'll be chasing shadows, Catherine said. Catherine returned late Sunday evening. The train windows blurred with frost, and she watched the ice on Lake Mendota shimmer like crystal in the moonlight. She stepped off at the station unnoticed. Her coat was plain, her gloves worn. She passed through the university quarter, her boots clicking across cobblestones. Langdon Street awaited, golden lit and trimmed with evergreens. She saw her mother's carriage idle outside the family home. Evelyn's laughter pealed faintly through a second-floor window. Neither of them recognized her when she passed. Catherine did not wave. That night in her flat, Catherine lit a fire and took out a new leather-bound ledger. The pages were cream-colored, the spine embossed with gilt. It had been a gift to herself. On the first page in deliberate script, she wrote, Ellery Holdings Acquisitions. She listed 3 items. Trust established, initial investments approved. Personal identity to remain obscured. She paused, then signed it. Miss Ellery. Outside, snow fell softly, unnoticed. The Winslow garden was a manicured sprawl of early spring, where crocuses nodded beside stone urns and the hedges had been clipped into geometric exactitude by men whose names were never spoken. On this particular afternoon, Madison's Garden Society assembled for what was ostensibly a discussion of hybrid roses, but in reality served as a gallery for familial and social alliances. Catherine had been summoned under the pretense of duty, but her presence was an accessory to her mother's greater staging. The entire event had been orchestrated to feature Evelyn and Mr. Nathaniel Langford in tableau. Catherine arrived in a modest lilac dress, her gloves mended at the fingertips, and took her place along the periphery beneath an elm. Langford, in a cream waistcoat and pale cravat, spotted her almost immediately. His approach was measured, his expression unreadable. "Miss Winslow," he greeted. "You have a habit of turning the unremarkable into an occasion." "Then I must warn you," she replied. "This occasion has been crafted by Evelyn. I'm only here under threat of maternal scandal." They spoke of nothing and everything, the chill in the air, the stiffness of social customs, the fatigue of those who perform for the sake of applause. Catherine observed the weight of Langford's silences, the way he allowed thought to bloom between phrases. Their moment ended when Evelyn descended like a falcon, radiating brightness. She took Langford's arm with theatrical intimacy and led him into the path of onlookers, tossing a glance over her shoulder at her sister triumphant and wary. Back in her flat, Catherine sat at her small writing desk, fingers stained with ink. The leather ledger lay open beside her. Ellery Holdings Weekly Summary. Real estate prospect. Corner lot near State Street. Publishing inquiry. Acquired proof copy from Harlow and Bray. Financial yield. Trust growth 3.2% this quarter. She tucked a note from Miss Ashe into the back pocket of the book. It was blunt and celebratory. "Congratulations. You're becoming quite the capitalist. Keep your head down. Money is louder than scandal." Catherine smiled faintly. At the next meeting of the Ladies' Conservatory Guild, Evelyn turned from hostess to strategist. Between trays of lemon cakes and brittle compliments, she dropped suggestions like poisoned pins. "Catherine's taken up residence somewhere near the rail yard?" "Oh, yes, she's quite modern now. I hear she's employed." "Isn't that darling?" She said it all with an air of concern while noting how Miss Adelaide Browning and Mrs. Van Dorn exchanged glances. Seeds planted in brittle soil. Catherine remained absent. The rumors curled without resistance, like smoke in a closed room. A cream-colored envelope arrived with the Morning Post, bearing Langford's distinct hand. Catherine studied the seal before breaking it. "Miss Winslow, if you would do me the honor of joining me for tea at the reading room tomorrow at 3, I would consider the afternoon vastly improved. Yours, N.P. Langford," she debated. But curiosity, or something dangerously close to hope, won. She wore a gray wool coat and a borrowed brooch. At the reading room, Langford stood as she entered. Their table was tucked near the window, where winter sunlight spilled like cream. "I hope this wasn't too forward," he said. "Only marginally," she replied. "But I've a fondness for marginal things." They spoke for nearly an hour, when she muttered almost bitterly, "A woman with no dowry, no prospects, no name. She must get creative." Langford regarded her quietly. "You underestimate your own fortune," he said. She looked away, lips curling faintly. "I intend to keep it that way." That evening, Catherine returned home to find Evelyn seated in her modest parlor. "You've redecorated," Evelyn said, rising slowly. "All this Spartan charm. Is it fashionable or just frugal?" Catherine removed her gloves. "What do you want, Evelyn?" "To talk. Sister to sister." Her tone was velvet, but the barbs lay beneath. "You've been quite visible lately. One wonders what you're hoping to achieve." Catherine said nothing. Evelyn stepped closer. "You're making things uncomfortable. For Mother, for me, for Mr. Langford." Still silence. "You always did like to make trouble," Evelyn whispered. "But this is more than mischief." Catherine's voice was quiet. "You can't lose what was never yours." Evelyn flinched. Catherine turned away unbothered. Evelyn left with her chin high, but her footsteps uncertain. The Madison Club, that solemn cathedral of polished oak and colonial eaves, hosted the winter art auction with a fanfare befitting its reputation. Gentlemen in white tie and ladies in velvet cascaded through its marbled atrium. Catherine Winslow entered alone, dressed plainly in a navy gown with no ornament save the silver watch pinned to her bodice. No carriage had delivered her. She walked. She stood near the back, a shadow among silk, until the portrait appeared. It was a piece of quiet, genius brushwork, restrained, palette subdued. The subject, a woman reading in partial shadow, her face obscured, her posture unassuming, yet the grace was unmistakable. It might have been anyone, and yet it was Catherine. Langford's voice rang out. 500. The room hushed. Murmurs rippled. Another gentleman raised his paddle. 6. Langford again. 1,000. A gasp. Evelyn stiffened, glancing rapidly between the portrait and the bidder. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, "to Mr. Nathaniel Langford." He offered no speech, no explanation, but Catherine felt the room tilt. Evelyn's smile wavered. 3 days later, Catherine returned to her apartment to find a parcel leaning against her door. No note, no seal. She peeled back the paper. The portrait stared back, the woman in shadow. The book half open, a flicker of something unnamed behind her eyes. Catherine placed it gently behind the curtain in her parlor. She could not bear to look, nor could she throw it away. The household on Langdon Street became a hive. Invitations were sent, menus debated, floral arrangements rehearsed. Evelyn rehearsed most of all. She orchestrated a scene. The Garden Society's Winter Charity Gala would serve as the moment. Langford would be coaxed into a toast. Guests would be primed to expect an announcement. Thaddeus Winslow rehearsed a congratulatory speech in private. Marguerite beamed. Catherine received a hand-delivered invitation with a scribbled note from Evelyn. Do attend. We've something very special planned. Miss Ash's telegram arrived with little ceremony. Holdings exceeded projection. Consolidated value now $127,000. Recommend acquisition. Evergreen Estate. Prime location. Catherine read the figures twice, then folded the paper into the back of her ledger. She wired the estate broker that same day. Across the lake from Langdon Street stood a gray-stoned manor, wrapped in ivy, backed by birch woods. It would be hers by spring. The gala unfurled like a ballet candle's quartets and murmured anticipation. Catherine entered through the side vestibule. She wore deep green silk and an expression of faultless calm. Evelyn swept through the hall with Langford at her side, her hand resting too heavily on his arm. Her laugh echoed too brightly, too often. Catherine took a glass of sherry, stood beside the long windows, and waited. Langford stepped forward at last, raised his glass, and the room fell still. Evelyn's smile gleamed. Catherine said nothing, but beneath her gloves her hands were already writing the next chapter. The Winslow estate had been transformed into a summer pageant of color and choreography. Crimson dahlias, white petunias, and blue delphiniums bloomed with calculated extravagance. Silk bunting draped the hedges, and parasols dotted the lawn like giant sherbet-colored blossoms. It was a charity event in name only. Beneath the gloss it was a stage. Evelyn Winslow presided in ivory lace and inherited confidence, flanked by society women who read gossip columns like scripture. Her smile was wide, her laughter rehearsed. Today the garden was hers, and so too, she believed, would be Nathaniel Langford. Guests murmured of the expected announcement. A Winslow-Langford union would tie East and Midwest in matrimonial steel. Thaddeus polished his toast. Marguerite whispered to guests about the heirloom ring hidden in the punch bowl display. Langford wandered the edges of the crowd, hands behind his back, eyes unreadable. Catherine arrived with no fanfare. She stepped from a simple cab, dressed in a seafoam gown of such plain cut it drew every eye. The bodice held no lace, no embellishment, only dignity. A hush rippled. Fans paused mid-flutter. Evelyn faltered, ever so slightly, as Langford looked past her, toward the woman who did not belong, yet could not be ignored. Catherine met no one's eyes. She stood near the arbor, sipping water, her expression serene. Evelyn recovered, pulled Langford toward the central dais. "Shall we toast?" she said with theatrical brightness. "To family, and to future joys." Langford was handed a crystal glass. He stepped onto the dais. All eyes turned. He began slowly. "It is easy," he said, "to mistake performance for substance. Easy to speak when applause is assured. But I've come to admire not those who speak, but those who endure." The crowd leaned in. "I have seen integrity in silence, and found truth not in those who shine, but those who simply continue." No name was spoken, but everyone noticed Evelyn's fingers tighten on her glass. Polite applause followed, tentative and confused. Langford stepped down. Evelyn smiled with sharp edges, but Catherine was already gone, her glass untouched, her chair unoccupied. Langford caught a glimpse of her leaving through the side gate. Their eyes met once, across manicured hedges and half-truths. Then she vanished. Evelyn raised her glass. Her smile returned, but her hand trembled. Catherine's carriage bumped along the road beside the lake, lanterns swinging softly inside. The driver said nothing. He had been paid not to ask. She arrived home before twilight, the new estate aglow with quiet welcome. Inside, she sat at her desk, opened her ledger, wrote one line. I no longer require applause. She closed the book, set her gloves aside, and walked onto the porch. The lake glittered. Across the water, the Winslow house burned with party lights, echoing laughter trailing across the surface like perfume. But the wind blew in a different direction now. Catherine's new estate stood proudly along the eastern edge of Lake Mendota, flanked by birch and ash trees. Built of gray stone and trimmed in dark cedar, the manor was elegant in its restraint. Unlike the decorative excess of Langdon Street, this home exhaled quiet strength. The furniture was simple, the colors muted. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the parquet floor. Catherine refused a live-in staff, opting instead for a discreet housekeeper who arrived only twice a week. She made her own tea. She opened her own windows. From her upstairs office, she could see the Winslow estate across the lake, its chimneys puffing, its banquets glowing, its guests glittering, but she never crossed the water. 3 scholarships were awarded to promising women at the university. No name was attached, just a modest signature, the Ellery Trust. Weeks later, Catherine signed the deed to a struggling printing press that employed women typesetters and editors. She retained its full staff, made renovations, and remained invisible. Miss Ashe sent a letter. You're no longer hiding. You're ruling. Keep your name quiet and your influence loud. Catherine filed the letter under personal correspondence. Then she returned to her ledger. Whispers traveled. One of Marguerite's society friends mentioned a woman had bought the estate east of the lake alone, unmarried, and investing. Evelyn sniffed. Probably an eccentric widow, or someone vulgar with cold money. But the doubt lingered. She asked the butler twice if they'd received mail from Catherine. Thaddeus, in a rare moment of curiosity, sent a short letter. Your new residence is charming. I trust you're well. If you find occasion, do write. Catherine did not. It was morning, fog curling at the edges of the water. Catherine stood on her veranda, cup in hand, watching the lake stir. Then movement. A rowboat, gliding slowly in it, Langford. Alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He was not fishing, not heading anywhere, just drifting. She did not wave, nor did he. Their eyes met across the expanse, held, spoke. He turned the boat, rowed away, vanishing into the birch shadows. Weeks later, the mason arrived. Catherine pointed to the space beside her front steps. Ellery House, she said. 2 inches tall, brass, simple serif. The mason blinked. That a family name, miss? Something quiet that became strong. That evening, Catherine lit the upstairs lamp. The golden square glowed against the dusk, facing west toward Langdon Street. Nathaniel Langford had always trusted his instincts, but this time they were not enough. Whispers of a discreet investment trust had reached his ears. At the Madison Club, Ellery Holdings, someone murmured between cigars and port. Curious, he arranged a quiet visit with a banker of mutual acquaintance. The banker, a thin-lipped man in tailored gray, offered only practiced courtesy. Private investments, profitable, clean, he said. Quite modest in its publicity, but its footprint is expanding. Langford asked to see public filings. The man hesitated, then relented. Langford scanned the documents. Dates, addresses, acquisitions. He froze the estate across the lake, the women's press. Even a parcel of farmland he had once considered. All under Ellery Holdings. There was no doubt. He set the file down slowly, his heartbeat steadying into E-all. At a dinner party, Evelyn overheard the name in passing. "Have you seen Ellery House?" "Most tasteful new build I've encountered." The glass slipped in her hand, splashing sherry across the linen. She laughed too brightly, asked too casually, sent letters, inquired discreetly. No one answered clearly. Back home, she questioned the cook, the butler, even the florist. She found nothing. Langford took to the lake again, this time with purpose. Catherine met him on the veranda, her book still in hand, face unreadable. He disembarked with practiced grace. "No pretense of accident. I was rowing," he said, clearly. He looked past her, toward the manor. "It suits you. You only needed to look." He stepped closer, not threatening, but insistent. "You vanished, or so I believed. But you were building all along, quietly." Catherine raised her chin slightly. "And now that I am visible, Nathaniel, what do you intend to do?" He did not answer. Their eyes held for a long moment, not romantic, but electric. Recognition passed between them. No touch followed. But something shifted. That same week, Evelyn hosted a luncheon for a dozen society ladies and discreetly let slip plans for an engagement announcement. The invitations went out the next morning, crisp, cream-colored with gold ink. Langford received his the same afternoon. He stood on his townhouse stoop, tore it cleanly in half, and dropped it into the street without a word. Winslow Hall was ablaze with chandeliers and anticipation. The grand ballroom, scented with peonies and bergamot, shimmered under crystal light. Madison's elite gathered in silken clusters, their conversation threaded with one expectation, the official engagement of Evelyn Winslow to Mr. Nathaniel Langford. Evelyn floated among them, radiant in pale blue satin, her laughter exaggerated, her posture faultless. But beneath her charm, her fingers twitched at her side. Langford was late. Thaddeus and Marguerite Winslow offered hushed reassurances, though Marguerite's fan beat a nervous rhythm against her sleeve. At last, just past the striking of the 8th hour, Langford arrived. Alone. His coat was crisp, but his face held shadows. He crossed the threshold, like a man arriving at his own reckoning. Evelyn glided toward him, latching onto his arm with practiced grace. "You've caused such suspense," she whispered. Langford smiled faintly, but did not respond. Marguerite beckoned. Thaddeus raised his glass. It was time for the toast. Evelyn stepped forward to address the room. Her voice rang clear. "Friends, family, and those dear to our hearts, tonight we gather not only in celebration but in promise. A future built on admiration, partnership, and delight." She raised her glass. Langford took a step forward. "If I may." The room held its breath. He spoke without raising his voice. "To integrity, to friendship, and to the rare, brave act of knowing oneself beyond all expectation." He clinked his glass against hers. She did not sip. The silence afterward was deafening. Evelyn held her smile until the guests turned away. Then she shattered. In the drawing-room, she hurled a vase against the fireplace. "He was mine," she hissed to Marguerite. She poisoned him with silence. "She's always been the ghost in the room." Marguerite said nothing. Thaddeus poured himself a brandy. 2 mornings later, a courier arrived at Ellery House with an envelope. Inside, a society column detailing the elegant affair at Winslow Hall, and an invitation with edges frayed. Catherine read the column carefully, neutral, almost evasive. No names, no promises. She folded the page, placed it in the hearth, and struck a match. As the flames licked the paper, she watched it curl into smoke, then turned back to her ledger without comment. The knock at Ellery House came without warning. Catherine opened the door to find Evelyn on the threshold, clad in a rose wool coat and the brittle expression of someone who had rehearsed their composure. Catherine stepped aside and gestured toward the sitting room. Tea was poured, civilities exchanged, but the smiles they wore were tight as corsets. Evelyn spoke first. "So this is the house. Simple. I imagine that suits you." Catherine replied softly. "You came for the house or the owner?" Evelyn's eyes glinted. "I came for answers, and perhaps an apology. Then I'm afraid you'll leave with neither." The conversation slid from civility to contest. Evelyn leaned forward, voice sharpened. "You think you've won something, Catherine, but all he did was see a novelty. Men like him don't marry shadows." Catherine's jaw set. "Then I am lucky I never offered myself in full light." Evelyn stood. "He pitied you. That portrait? Charity." Catherine rose to meet her gaze. "Then why did it shake you so?" There was no answer, only air brittle with rage. Evelyn's tone shifted, sweeter and more venomous. "I will not be shamed by you. This city, our family, was not built for your little rebellions." Catherine stared steadily. "Then you'd better fortify it." Evelyn took a breath. "I will protect what is mine, Catherine, at any cost." Catherine poured herself more tea. "You're already paying." In the days that followed, rumors began to surface. Nothing direct, just a slow erosion of credibility. Catherine's publisher received a call questioning her authorship. The florist refused her order, citing unpaid balances. An anonymous letter circulated among the Conservatory Guild, suggesting she had ambitions to manipulate certain unmarried gentlemen. Mr. Whitmore, ever neutral, sent a note. "Be cautious. Miss Winslow is setting fires she may not contain." That evening, Catherine walked along the lake. The surface reflected the full moon like a blade. She returned home, opened her writing desk, and penned one letter. The envelope bore Langford's name, but she placed it in the bottom drawer. She pulled her ledger forward and began to write. Her first line began consolidation. Protect the press. Reinforce the trust. Prepare exit routes. Her hand did not tremble. Catherine Winslow hosted her luncheon with unshakable poise. The table beneath Ellery House's arched veranda was lined with pressed linens and pale roses. The guest list a subtle masterstroke. Ladies of influence, publishers, 1 or 2 whisper-prone dowagers. As dessert was served, Catherine stood. "There is power in narrative," she said calmly, "and today I share one you were never meant to hear." From a small folio she produced records, unsigned letters, forged debts, timed social rumors. She named no culprit, but the pattern was unmistakable. There was a stillness among the women, a shift in the wind. Teacups halted mid-air. More than one pair of eyes darkened with recognition. No accusations, only facts, and the echo of quiet ruin. Later that week, Langford arrived. He had the letter. Not sent, but given to him by Mr. Whitmore. Its ink was faded, but the feeling within it burned. Catherine met him in the garden. He took her hand, held it a moment longer than form required. I thought I had seen strength, but I had only seen pride. You are strength. She studied him. I have nothing to offer you but what I am. That is everything. But when he stepped closer, she raised her hand. Not yet. Let me arrive at love by my own design. He bowed, smiled. I will wait. The Winslow name still held gravity, but even gravity weakens with altitude. Evelyn found herself uninvited, unwelcome, unnamed in polite conversation. She smiled through it, then vanished. A note arrived at Langdon Street. I shall take some time abroad. Europe is clearer in winter. Thaddeus folded it and said only she will be back. Marguerite disagreed silently. Dusk settled gently over Lake Mendota. The shoreline bore no memory of what had passed, only the soft press of two figures walking. Langford and Catherine moved without urgency. Their hands met in quiet certainty. They spoke not of promises, but of plans, of a press that would soon expand, of scholarships that would double. As the sun dipped beneath the trees, Catherine turned to him. Some endings require no applause, only silence. He said nothing, only looked at her as if she had been music all along. They kept walking. Autumn in Madison came gently, with golden leaves adrift on Lake Mendota and chimney smoke curling like slow-drawn breath. Ellery House remained, as ever, a monument not to wealth, but to intention. Its ivy was thicker, its roof recently repaired. The brass plaque beside the door had dulled slightly, but the name it bore, Ellery House, was still legible in the afternoon sun. Catherine Winslow, or rather Miss Ellery, as the world knew her, stood on her veranda with a wool shawl pulled tightly over her shoulders. She watched the lake not for memories, but for weather. She had learned to prepare for storms without dreading them. Her press had grown. Now 3 offices bore her trust's emblem, a small quill within a circle. She had funded not only scholarships, but a new reading hall for women and a printing school for girls who had never seen their names in books. Langford had become her partner in many ventures, but never her shadow. They met often, spoke regularly, sometimes walked the shore. His name had never graced her door, nor did she expect it to. She had never married. The newspapers speculated, of course. They wondered about her solitude, her wealth, her refusal, but no story could contain the quiet grace of a woman who no longer waited for permission. One evening in October, she attended the dedication of the Winslow Reading Hall. Evelyn did not return, but Marguerite and Thaddeus sat stiffly in the front row. When Catherine took the podium, she thanked the people of Madison, then stepped down without fanfare. Langford was there. He did not offer his arm, only walked beside her to the carriage. Still no applause, he murmured. Catherine smiled. Only silence. As the carriage pulled away, Langford looked back at the building bearing her name. You built it without permission, the only kind worth building. They did not speak again until they reached the lake. That night, Ellery House burned with lamplight, a fire that did not destroy, but warmed. And so, dear friends, our tale draws to a close. If you've lingered until the final word, allow me to offer my sincerest thanks. It has been a gentle privilege to share this quiet hour with you. I hope the story brought with it a touch of calm, a soft pause, a thoughtful breath, perhaps the faintest trace of a smile. Until our paths cross once more, be it beside the fire or through a pair of headphones, I wish you peace, comfort, and good company. Another novel shall follow in its time. another evening, another whisper of a world not quite our own. Good night, or good day, whichever finds you first.